can fly.
Yo guys, what's going on? Johnny here. Hope everyone is having a great time. Hope everyone is staying nice and healthy. Today's video, we're going to be talking about pre-match nutrition, halftime nutrition, and post-match nutrition, particularly in the context of football, but it also can apply a bit to, other team sports as well, such as rugby, for example. But we're going to be talking a lot about, answering that question that people always sometimes have is, what should I eat before a game? What should I eat after a game? What should I eat during a game? They're all great questions to ask. I mean, that's one of the most simple things to ask to help you perform. And, when you really want to do well on the pitch, impress the coach and all that sort of thing, it's really important to know, what to eat. For example, I think there was a video from Unisport as well. There are some videos out there, that show people what to eat before a game. And it was eye-opening as well when I saw, before a game, we're eating so much carbs, very little protein, and very little veggies, which is correct, which is true. We do have guidelines, for example, which recommend when it's heavy training, we say cover your plate, half a plate of carbs, quarter plate of protein, and a quarter plate of veggies. Reason being we want so much carbs is because carbs are the nutrient that helps you fuel for your muscles and brain, for example. When you're playing team sports, you're making decisions, you're making sprints, you're making runs, tackles, explosive movements. You watch football, for example, so much explosive movements. It's not just sprinting day in, day out. It's also a bit of walking, bit of running and sprinting, jumping as well. There's so many dynamic and explosive movements that you're making. Therefore, carbs are king when it comes to these sort of sports, high intensity sports. Not just sports, but also if you're doing HIIT training, those sort of things where you're really physically pushing yourself, carbs are king. Which can be a surprise to a lot of people too, when they're trying to lose weight and they're thinking, oh, I need to lose weight, carbs are the enemy, that sort of thing. But this is in the context of performance. If you want to perform, you want to do well in the game and stuff, make sure you have your carbs. Now, how much carbs should I be having? It's a great question to ask, and there are so many ways you can go about it too. So, like for example, at the moment, we do have like a UEFA expert group statement on nutrition in elite football. Now, bear in mind as well, these guidelines they're suggesting here are particularly for example, elite footballers. So it does say, for example, in-season training, 1 game per week, 3 to 8 grams per kilo of your body weight. And then when you get to even more high intensity with congested fixture periods, we're thinking Christmas time where it's like 2 to 3 games per week, international duty, European League, Champions League and all that. You can go even as high to 6 to 8 grams per kilo of your body weight. Now, when should you start fueling up? This was one of my mistakes I made for a couple weeks. I thought my pre-match meal should just start 3 to 4 hours before the beginning of my game. But it's not as simple as that. Fueling starts 24 hours before the beginning of a game. So if you have a game that starts at 3, you start fueling up 3 p.m. the day before. Now coming back to those numbers the UEFA said, yes, there are numbers, but it isn't a hard and fast rule as to say, that you need to stick to these numbers. These are guidelines. Life happens as well. You may not, electricity might go out, for example, and you can't cook a lot of pasta, for example, and therefore you need fuel, but you go to Macca's or something or takeaway. Life happens, all right? So just because there are these suggested guidelines and stuff like that, if you don't follow them to a T, for example, doesn't mean it's the end of the world. There are other ways, as well, to help fuel yourself. So, having half a plate of carbs, quarter plate of protein, and quarter plate of veg. You don't have to measure it out or anything. Just make sure your plate is half a plate of carbs. But you're starting the day before, which can be a bit tricky as well if you're playing like semi-pro or amateur league. When you have a job as well on top of football, sometimes it's a bit hard to start fueling that early as well. That's when I'd start suggesting, having some snacks as well. Start fueling. You don't need to make sure that the first thing you have before the game is a meal. Like if you're at 3 p.m. and it's not really an ideal time to have a meal, having some snacks and starting your fueling up a little bit there, and then having your dinner, and then going from there is a way you can achieve fueling as well. But just as important as fueling is hydration. So, even before a game, as you get closer to the game, you want less protein, fiber, and fat, because those are things that's going to get stuck into your gut. And the last thing you want to happen when you hop onto that pitch is your stomach feeling really full. You want to feel light, don't you? The last thing you want is when you start making that darting sprint down the wing, is you then suddenly get a stitch and you get subbed off. That's a really bad feeling. But as I was talking about briefly, hydration. So just as important when you're having carbs is also fluid as well. So how can you tell whether you're hydrated enough is a great question as well. You can, as simple as if you don't have any fancy equipment, measure your urine status. When you pee in the beginning of the day, if it looks really dark in color, that can suggest that you're maybe very dehydrated and you might need to focus a lot on a bit more water and electrolytes during the day. If your pee is a little bit more apple juice color, maybe a bit lighter as well on this scale that I'll show, then it's a better indication of you being hydrated as well. But as I was saying as well, protein, fiber, and fat, as you get closer to the game day or the match time, you want to make sure that those three things are cut down. That means, for example, like 30 minutes or an hour before the game, you're really just focusing on simple sugars, so having lollies and snakes. Yes, you are having snakes. A dietitian is suggesting to have lollies and stuff before a game. Yes, because your body needs the fuel. What these pre-training snacks helps to top up your muscle stores. So before you go into the game, 3 to 4 hours before the game, you have your final meal, and then you're starting to have a bit more carbohydrate snacks and that sort of thing. They help to top up your fuel. So then once you hit the game, in those first few seconds or minutes of the game, you start off super explosive. Then it starts to die down the game, and you start to using a lot more of your sugars and your glucose and all that sort of thing. But it starts to die down. You're starting to use your tank's fuel. Now, when you get to during the game, so the football match, if you're including warm-up as well, the total duration you're thinking is about 2 hours. And we do have guidelines, for example. This is also a shout out to Tom Shaw, who in this post here, he also has noticed that, 30 to 60 grams per hour, and athletes are consuming on the very, very low end. Shout out to Tom Shaw. His posts are brilliant. So anyway, what he was talking about was that, for endurance exercise that's greater than an hour. So in football, we got we go down to the pitch maybe 45 minutes earlier. We start warm up for about 30 minutes, and then you got a 90-minute game. So it's about 2 hours total. The guidelines recommend for something that's like that, you need 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbs. So for a total of 2 hours, you're looking at 60 to 120 grams of carbohydrates for the full 2 hours, which is a lot of carbs. What Tom Shaw was showing in that post there was that elite athletes, professional footballers were really underfueling. In the changing room and that sort of thing, there's a lot of missed opportunities to fuel. Now, when we're looking at, for example, amateur league, you might not be focusing so much on the numbers, for example. Fine. You're just playing the sport for your social occasion. That's fine. Then what happens, for example, at halftime? What should I be doing at halftime? That is the golden opportunity to try and get as much fuel as possible, because one, the coach is going to quickly come back and tell you what we need to do in the second half, who's going to be coming in, who's going to be coming out, any changes to strategies, for example. You need to listen up. If you need to listen, you need to use your brain. If you need to use your brain, you need to have some carbs so that you get the sugars. And as well, you've got another second set of 45 minutes coming up. You want to make sure as well that you are fueled up properly too, So that's why it's important. The reason why those recommendations are there for during the game is 30 to 60 grams is that when you hit that upper limit, so for a football match 120 minutes, when you hit that upper limit, it's that taking in more carbohydrate doesn't result in more use by the muscle. So just because you go even more above 120 grams doesn't mean you'll be using more fuel. That's sort of the upper limit research has shown us to be. That's how much carbs you'll need to, your muscle can take up during the game. And then that lower rate, this is another time, this is a video for another time, but when you go towards that lower end, maybe that's 60 grams or not really fueling as much, it's trying to show that, there are some studies that show when you go for that lower end, you might have a bit of performance benefits, being things such as your body able to burn a bit more fat, for example, getting a bit more aerobic adaptations, being more cardiovascular, building your cardiovascular strength, for example. There are some studies that show, for example, when you train low or cut down a bit on your carbs and going on that lower end, that you can see some of these performance benefits. But that's another video for another time. There's a lot going on in that sort of thing. Alright guys, I think I might call it there for this video here. We've covered a bit on pre-match nutrition and halftime nutrition during game. I'll go into the next video, about what to have during halftime, and then we'll go into, post-match nutrition, and then we can talk about other things, for example. But I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.